We're going to do another example of a proof using the method of contraposition. We're going to do this one here for any real number x. If x squared minus 5x plus 6 is bigger than or equal to 0, then either x is less than or equal to 2 or x is bigger than or equal to 3. So put your video on hold and write it out in symbols for me. Okay, so it says for every real number x, if x squared minus 5x plus 6 is bigger than or equal to 0, then x is less than or equal to 2, or x is bigger than or equal to 3. Now let's see what would be involved if we proved it either directly or using contraposition. Now regardless if you do a direct proof or a proof by contraposition, you have to begin by selecting a generic real number x, and then if you do a direct proof, you have to assume that relative to that x, this is true, and from that you have to deduce that this is true. So that's what I've written here. On the other hand, if you're doing a proof by contraposition, you assume that the negation of this is true, and you have to deduce from that that the negation of this is true, and that's what I've written here, right? The negation of this is x is bigger than 2 and x is less than 3, and we'd have to deduce from that that x squared minus 5x plus 6 is less than 0. Now regardless of which of the two methods we use, you have to realize that x squared minus 5x plus 6 factors as this product. So now if you're doing a direct proof, you get to use this fact. So that means this is bigger than or equal to 0. You've got a product of two things bigger than or equal to 0. So that means they both have to have the same sign. So if both of them are bigger than or equal to 0, you'd have to convince yourself that that implies that x is bigger than or equal to 3, which gives you this case. And if both of them are less than or equal to 0, you'd have to convince yourself that that implies that x minus 2 is that x is less than or equal to 2, which would give you this one. Now I think you'll find if you write up that proof that it's not that easy to write it in a way that the reader can follow very easily. On the other hand, if you try proof by contraposition, then you get to assume that this is true, which means you get to assume that x is bigger than 2 and smaller than 3, but x bigger than 2 guarantees that x minus 2 is positive, and x smaller than 3 guarantees that x minus 3 is negative. So now you're multiplying a positive by a negative. That has to come out negative, and so you have successfully deduced this. So I think you'll agree that proof by contraposition is much easier to write up. So what I want you to do now is put your video on hold, do a proof of this using contraposition, and when you come back, you can compare your solution to mine. Well, here you see my proof. So always when I write my proof, I always have my eye on the statement written out in symbols. And this dictates what the first sentence should be. It should be, let x be a real number. Then I say, we argue by contraposition. And that means my eye goes here. And I say, assume that the negation of this occurs. So I say, suppose it is not the case that either x is less than or equal to 2 or x is bigger than or equal to 3. Well, then I write down what that says. It says that then x is bigger than 2 and x is smaller than 3. It follows from this that x minus 2 is positive and x minus 3 is negative. And so since the product of two real numbers of opposite sign is negative, we obtain that this product is negative. Since x squared minus 5x plus 6 is equal to that, we have shown that x squared minus 5x plus 6 is negative. this completes the proof. So now, look at the overall structure of what I've done. There are 3 points to observe. I began by selecting a real number x. Once I said that I was going to argue by contraposition, I then said, suppose the negation of this is true. So that's what I did here. And ultimately, at the end of the proof, I don't mention anything about x squared minus 5x plus 6 being negative until the very end. I say, we have shown that x squared minus 5x plus 6 is negative. I don't mention it until I know it to be true, until I've proven that it's true. And finally, I want you to be very critical about your writing of proofs. You know, I didn't just get this immediately. I didn't just write it down without any trouble. There were a few places where I had to rewrite it because I didn't like the way it read. So you should do the same thing. The other thing is, do allow yourself to make use of certain math symbols. You see that I'm using lots of symbols, but those can be interpreted as sentences, right? This thing here has symbols in it, but it still reads as, then x is bigger than 2 and x is less than 3. Okay, so these are still sentences, even though I'm using notation to make it read a little bit easier.